Baton Rouge welcomed Danica Morgan, a black female special agent, with sneers and racist slurs on the street, just 7 years after she had served her country with her life on the line. Worse still, she was shoved against a wall by a white cop who looked at her with contempt, hurled false accusations, and handcuffed her in public with humiliating ease. Through eyes clouded by prejudice and powered by a warped sense of authority, no one saw a veteran who had fought for her nation. They saw only her skin. As the system moved in to crush her beneath its weight of red tape and bigotry, a horrifying truth came to light, and the very people who claimed to serve justice were forced to pay a price they never saw coming. How many times must a black woman prove her innocence simply because she dared not to bow her head? Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment and stay until the end to see how it all unfolds. The steel click of handcuffs snapped coldly around Danica Morgan's wrist beneath the slanted rays of a late afternoon sun blazing over a Louisiana street still simmering with summer heat. The asphalt burned like it might crack beneath her feet, but nothing was hotter than the hand of the white officer pressing her shoulder into the gray brick wall of a corner grocery store. "Cooperate. Don't make this harder on yourself," said Officer Blake Simmons, his voice low and heavy, his jaw clenched tight like someone trying to bury rage under the thin glaze of authority. But his eyes, hidden behind sunglasses that mirrored the blistering sky, couldn't hide the contempt dripping onto the back of Danica's neck like acid. She didn't resist, didn't cry, didn't lower her voice. She just stood there, her back flat against the wall, one hand cuffed, the other shoulder pinned by a man nearly twice her size. No plea came from her lips, only a stillness so composed it became dangerous. That calm, more than anything, was what unhinged Simmons. Just beside him, Tucker Reeves, a younger, leaner officer in the same uniform but with a colder presence altogether, stood with arms crossed. He didn't step in, didn't move forward. He simply tilted his head slightly, thumbed the button of his radio behind his back, and spoke evenly. One, black female, agitated behavior, possibly armed, requesting immediate backup. I repeat, possibly armed. His voice was disturbingly calm, like describing a defective product, not a human being. But in his eyes, a faint smirk lingered, as if watching a performance he already knew the ending to. The crowd started forming. Some stood behind lampposts, others pulled over, rolled down their windows, but everyone kept their distance as if they were used to the sight of a black woman being pinned to a wall. So used to it, they stopped believing it was wrong. So used to it, the phones came out to live stream faster than any instinct to intervene. Shouts rose from behind. "She didn't do anything. Get your hands off her." But no one stepped forward. No one pulled Simmons back. In this space where the law was being enforced, the cuffs were colder than any human heart. Danica turned her face away from the sun burning into her eyes. Though cuffed on one side, she stood tall, refusing to let Simmons push her down. Her free hand curled loosely, tendons showing, but steady. "This is how you treat a woman buying a bottle of water in broad daylight?" Her voice steady, every word slicing through the pretense surrounding the officer like a blade. Simmons leaned in closer, his words hissing through gritted teeth. "I deal with people who think they're above the law. Don't think that military ID's gonna save you." Danica tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes filled with no fear, no pleading. Just one thing that made Simmons squirm to his core, the unwavering belief that she was not beneath him. The live stream camera shifted. A new caption popped up. "Cops cuffing innocent black woman on 8th Street. Anyone nearby come now." Sirens howled in the distance like an overture to a symphony where every note had been strung centuries ago with prejudice. Every approaching footstep was a drumbeat of power. But Danica Morgan, under every probing stare, against the cold brick, and a shaking camera lens, still stood. One hand was bound, but her head had never bowed. Everything unraveled 45 minutes earlier when Danica Morgan walked slowly along the sun-cracked sidewalk of South Baton Rouge. She wore a fitted gray t-shirt, thin cargo pants, and worn sneakers. Nothing about her appearance said she once wore a uniform, once held a rifle, or once crossed the line between life and death hundreds of times. But the way she walked, upright, eyes forward, shoulders never slack, spoke louder than any badge. She was someone who had been through war and survived. Surviving war, though, didn't mean being welcomed home. Danica had just passed the old street corner where she used to jump rope with neighborhood kids when a group of men gathered in front of a run-down liquor store turned their eyes toward her. One of them, puffing on a cigarette, squinted and called out, "Hey, girl, where you headed? Walking like a damn general?" A gruff-looking white guy, voice slurred but loud enough to make sure she heard it. The second man, younger, in ripped jeans and a sweat-soaked tank top, snorted and added, "Probably heading to audition for GI Queen or something. Just looking at her sucks the testosterone out of the air." Laughter broke out, not the kind shared among friends, but the sharp-edged kind soaked in microaggressions. It was part joke, part reminder that in their eyes, a black woman walking alone with confidence and simple clothes was something absurd, suspicious, out of place. Another guy, wiry, with tangled hair that hadn't met a comb in weeks, narrowed his eyes and said half mockingly, half seriously, "You look like a cop, or a prison warden. Should we be raising our hands now?" Danica slowed her pace for a second, not from hesitation, but because she knew exactly what that tone meant. None of them cursed. None used overt slurs. But every word carried the same message. You don't belong here, and we still own this space, with our laughter, our stares. She didn't turn back, didn't respond, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But behind her, one more voice called out, dragged out and dripping with meaning. "If someone likes you in the military, then maybe the world is ending." They didn't know who she was, didn't know she had walked battlefields in the Middle East, had led elite special ops teams on classified missions. To them, she was just a black woman whose upright posture felt like a challenge, and that alone made her a target for mockery. Danica kept walking, never glancing back. But inside her, an old wound had been peeled open again, like a forgotten melody suddenly playing the one unfinished bar she thought she'd erased. This street, once everything she called home, now felt like a worn-out stage, and she, the performer, no longer welcome to return. 7 years. 7 years ago, Danica had walked away from this place in her first military uniform, just after placing a bronze medal on her mother's coffin. Viola Morgan, a retired nurse who died in the back of an ambulance after the nearest hospital refused to admit her for not having official insurance. They said it was overcapacity, but Danica knew better. This area, mostly black, low income, had never been a priority. She had held her mother's cold hand that night, feeling the breath fade while EMTs argued over the radio. "We can't take another patient. This one doesn't have the proper paperwork." Paperwork, the system's favorite word, and something Danica carried with her ever since, now in the form of a stamped military ID. United States Navy SEAL, active duty. It hadn't saved her mother, but it might be enough to make someone think twice before pushing her into the same ending. Danica stepped into a corner store, a dingy place with flickering yellow lights and leaning shelves of soda. The shop owner, a wiry white man named Roy, looked at her over his drooping glasses, eyes cautious. "Just a cold water," she said, placing $2 on the counter. Roy said nothing. He quietly pulled a bottle from the cooler. Danica took it, nodded slightly, and turned to leave. his eyes still on her, like he couldn't quite believe a black woman walking alone only wanted to buy water. She stepped outside, the glass door chiming a faint ding, and at that exact moment, a police siren wailed in the distance. Her instincts made her turn, eyes scanning quickly toward the sound. Something in her stirred, just faintly, like heat off the pavement brushing an old scar. She took a sip of water. Her hand gripped the bottle a little tighter. In the distance, over the hum of traffic and cicadas, came a voice crackling over a police radio. Black female suspect, possibly armed, gray shirt, dark pants. The soft screech of tires hugging the curb made Danica look up. A white and blue Baton Rouge patrol car pulled up just a few feet from her, its wheels pressing lightly onto the sun-scorched edge of the grass like it was staking a claim, not just on the sidewalk, but on her very presence. The window rolled down slowly, and from inside appeared a face, Officer Blake Simmons, early 40s, sun-worn skin, square jaw, sunglasses reflecting her image at her like a quiet threat. You're being watched. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming on the left side of his chest, his right arm resting casually on the window frame with the ease of someone used to controlling every room he entered. "Afternoon," Simmons began, voice even but just slightly laced with emphasis. "Don't think I've seen you around. Just move in." Danica stopped walking and turned to face him. Her gaze was steady, her voice calm and measured. "I grew up here." The words held no defiance, yet they made Simmons squint like she'd just said something wrong. "That so?" he replied, raising a brow. "I've been patrolling this area for nearly 2 decades. Never seen you. Or maybe you're just passing through for some reason?" His voice was sugar-coated suspicion, but the way he said "passing through" carried layers. One of those vague insinuations men like Simmons reserved for black women walking alone. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on his. "I'm just walking. Nothing unusual about that." Simmons gave a slight nod, like weighing options. His eyes were hidden behind the glasses, but a half-smile started to creep across his lips. "Right, just walking. But you understand, it's our job to keep the neighborhood safe. A lot of unfamiliar faces lately, and you don't quite look like you're from around here." Danica furrowed her brow just a little, but she didn't flinch. What exactly does someone from around here look like? At that moment, Simmons leaned forward slightly as if inspecting a product for scratches. "It's just not everyone walks like you. Back straight, eyes up, like you're trying to prove something." Danica let out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't the laugh of someone humiliated. It was the kind of laugh anyone who's survived enough prejudice knows well. Soft, solid, and sharp enough to cut back. "I'm not proving anything. I'm just walking on the street where I was born." Simmons tilted his head, hand still resting lightly on the wheel. "Born here, huh? Funny thing. A lot of people claim this place as home, but never really lived like it." Danica didn't answer right away. In her mind, each of his words appeared like silk-wrapped blades. No shouting, no slurs, just thick with implication, that she didn't belong, that she was only visiting, that her presence, however lawful, was still unwelcome. "I think where you live matters less than how people treat each other." That response made Simmons pause. A tense silence flickered between them, like the surface of water right before it breaks. "Fair enough," he said with a nod. "Just that. Some folks try too hard to be different, and then wonder why people notice." A passing car briefly interrupted the conversation. Simmons didn't say anything for a beat. Then, leaning slightly toward the open window, he said, "You know, in these parts, young women like you tend to end up in trouble. Dealing, weapons, bad decisions. So, I've got the right to be cautious." Danica folded her arms, shoulders unmoved. "And my posture made you think I'm dealing weapons?" That question, delivered evenly, threw Simmons off for a second. He froze, adjusted his seat. "I'm just doing my job." "Fine," Danica said, "and I'm doing mine, taking a walk." Across the street, people had started to notice. A kid on a bike stared their way. An elderly woman on a second-floor balcony had stopped sweeping. Simmons saw them too, but he wasn't done yet. "Name? I'm not being detained, and I haven't committed a crime. You have no right to ask." Her voice wasn't raised, but it was clear, firm and steady enough to make him feel, for the first time, like he was being challenged by someone he thought would fold but didn't. Simmons chuckled, but a faint edge crept into his voice. "Women like you always think you're being hunted, but maybe it's the attitude that brings the attention." That sentence pierced straight through the armor Danica had worn for 2 decades. Attitude. That's what he called it, as if she, the woman who had led teams across enemy lines, who had pulled civilians out of rubble under enemy fire, who had saluted flag-draped coffins, was now the problem on the streets of her own country. The country she had risked everything for. And yet here she was, black, female, silent but unbowed, seen as a threat, simply for not shrinking back. How much sacrifice is enough to earn? The right to walk in peace on the soil you swore to protect, she wondered. Then Danica tightened her grip on the water bottle, keeping her shoulders square. She knew, in this America, a black person didn't always get to walk without being questioned. But if she bowed her head now, how would the next generation ever believe they had the right to walk tall? The evening breeze swept softly across the rusted awning of the old pharmacy across the street, but it did nothing to clear the heaviness spreading from the patrol car. "Name?" Simmons repeated, his voice lower now but weightier, like a command wrapped in civility. Danica didn't speak. Instead, she reached into the side pocket of her pants, unzipped a small wallet, and pulled out a sharp-edged green ID card, her military identification, clearly marked, Lieutenant Danica Morgan, United States Navy SEAL. She held it up just high enough for him to see, not too close, and said nothing. Simmons took it between 2 fingers, raising it toward the slanting light of sunset. A smirk crept to the corner of his lips. "Lieutenant Morgan," he read aloud, over-enunciating every syllable like he was playing a customs officer in some bad border checkpoint drama. "Navy SEAL? You? Really?" The question didn't wait for an answer. It didn't need one. The disbelief was already baked into his voice. "You know," he said, flipping the card back and forth in his hand like he was looking for loose laminate, "I've seen a few fake ones like this at county fairs. How much did you pay for yours?" Danica said nothing. She stared straight at Simmons. No apology, no fear, no explanation, and that silence seemed to disturb him more than any protest could. He lowered the card, glancing back like he might radio in to verify it, when suddenly another figure emerged. Officer Tucker Reeves stepped out from a different patrol car, tall, pale, buzz-cut blonde, moving quietly to stand behind Simmons. Danica had never expected rescue, but for a brief second, when Reeves appeared, she thought, maybe this time will be different, that even in a reality soaked in bias, there might still be space for justice to show up in uniform. She leaned forward slightly, gave a curt nod, not friendly, but not cold either. She turned half a step, greeted him simply. "Good evening, officer. Could you please verify? My name is Lieutenant Morgan. My military ID is valid, and I—" A short laugh burst from Reeves, dismissive, loaded with the kind of disdain that made it clear nothing she said mattered. "Oh, I see," he said, dragging the words out as he glanced at Simmons, flashing a grin thin as thread. "Looks like we've got ourselves a warrior here, kind of like a Hollywood action figure, just darker skinned." Danica's chest tightened, not because of the insult, it wasn't new, but because of the cold wave that rushed down her spine, that fragile flicker of hope she'd just allowed herself to feel was now being crushed brutally and without hesitation. That hope, small, vulnerable, had been the only thing she carried into the most dangerous places on earth, and now it lay discarded in the dust by two men wearing the uniform of justice. Danica reached out and retrieved her ID with a firm, precise motion. No rush, no bitterness, just a move to protect the last sliver of dignity she'd built over a lifetime of service. Simmons glanced at Reeves. Their eyes locked, not a word exchanged, but an understanding passed between them. A silent alliance, bound by power and arrogance, capable of wounding without drawing a single weapon. "I think further verification is necessary," Simmons said, his tone slow and clipped like reading from a manual. "This document doesn't put me at ease. And, frankly, the way she looks at me, she seems to forget who's allowed to ask questions here." Reeves gave a half-smile, his stare empty. "Gotta admit," he said, "she's got the leader vibe. Shame she brought it to the wrong place." A few people had started to notice. 2 officers and a black woman, too conspicuous to ignore. Danica stood her ground, eyes fixed toward the end of the block, where, years ago, her mother had called for an ambulance in vain. She had once believed America would be different when she returned, that the uniform and her loyalty would earn her recognition as a human being. But here, on the very soil that raised her, those hopes were dissolving under the icy words and hollow stares of 2 men in uniform. Under the stretched golden light of a Baton Rouge afternoon, the air seemed to congeal as Tucker Reeves leaned in slightly, pressing a hand to the radio clipped to his left shoulder, his voice even, but each word weighted with intent. "Unit 527. The subject is female, African American, and approximately 35 to 40 years old, displaying uncooperative behavior, verbally confrontational, agitated, possibly armed, requesting backup to ensure area security." The words left his mouth like any routine dispatch, but the tone, the cadence, the structure carried one singular outcome. Danica was now a threat, and she could feel it instantly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the first deliberate signal in the machinery of something far larger, a system that didn't need bullets to break a person, only a narrative. Danica stared at Reeves, her eyes sharp as a blade. From the sidewalk, murmurs had started rising. The people around weren't strangers to police presence, but what caught their attention now was the expression on the face of the woman being cornered. Danica took a deep breath. She turned toward the crowd, her gaze scanning briefly until it landed on a middle-aged woman with brown skin holding up a phone, her hand shaken slightly, but the camera held steady at eye level. "I am Lieutenant Danica Morgan, a former SEAL officer, honorably discharged. I am standing on a public sidewalk. I have not assaulted anyone. I have not drawn a weapon. I presented a valid military ID. Every one of you saw that." Her voice rang clear, measured, firm, louder than any defense could be. In that moment, she reclaimed the scene not as a suspect, but as a witness for herself. A young man in sunglasses near the corner store nodded. The girl beside him leaned in, whispered something, then pulled out her phone. An older man with a cane under a tree called out in a thick southern drawl, "That lady was just talking. I saw her show that ID plain as day. Them 2 acting like she's some kind of devil." Blake Simmons glanced sideways at Reeves, his jaw tensing half a beat. He hadn't expected this. He tilted his head close to Reeves and muttered, "Keep the crowd from pushing in. I'll handle her by protocol." Reeves rolled his shoulders slightly, eyes scanning the growing number of residents watching from porches, sidewalks, and behind cracked doors. His sunglasses reflected dozens of raised phones, suspicious stares, and whispers gaining volume. He knew one wrong move could turn this into something much larger. Danica, meanwhile, remained rooted, feet planted like bolts in the pavement. A black boy, maybe 13, stood next to his mother, staring up at Danica as if seeing a version of himself projected into the future, and that made her grip the moment tighter. She couldn't retreat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she spoke again, this time her eyes sweeping across the bystanders, voice lower but even more resolute. "If any of you have ever been stopped for no reason, ever been asked for your papers because of your skin, ever been questioned in the street because you matched a description, remember this moment. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm walking down a road where my mother once died, and I'm treated like a criminal because I won't bow my head." The words didn't need to be shouted. Each one hit like a drum beat in the listeners' chests. Simmons shifted his eyes, jaw tight like he was swallowing stone. Reeves shot him a glance, then stepped one pace closer to Danica. "That's enough," Reeves said through clenched teeth. "You're escalating the situation, inciting the crowd." Danica tilted her head slightly, her lips forming a cold, deliberate smile. "I'm telling the truth. If the truth makes you nervous, maybe I'm not the problem." A quiet "ooh" came from across the street. Someone whistled. Cameras kept rolling. Reeves tightened his grip on his radio. Simmons stepped half a pace back, recalculating. In just a few minutes, Danica had shifted the balance, not by force, but by presence. She had put two armed men on the defensive under the watchful eyes of their community. But she knew moments like this never lasted, and when the system retaliated, it didn't use reason. It used paperwork, policy, and power. Danica exhaled softly, but her spine held firm like a steel cable. The first battle had surfaced, and it was no different than those she'd faced in war zones. The only change was this time. The man who might pull the trigger wore the same colors as the flag she once swore to defend. But if what she said today gave even one person in that crowd the courage to speak up when it was their turn, then every word, every glance, every breath spent holding her ground was worth it. Simmons stepped forward like a man already staging his performance of control. His arm came up in a sharp motion, and his iron hand clamped down on Danica's left wrist, the one nearest the wall, the side she'd been pushed toward since the beginning. Everything about his movement carried the self-assurance of someone who believed that contact alone could command submission. But Simmons had misjudged everything. The moment his grip tightened, Danica shifted her weight in a movement so subtle it was nearly invisible. A small, fluid adjustment, smooth like water slipping through stone. Her wrist turned, not in resistance, but with the kind of precision that redirected his strength back onto himself. Within a second, Simmons lost his balance, tipping forward, his stance broken. The crowd gasped. A brown-skinned man nearby blurted out, "Damn, what the hell did she just do?" A middle-aged woman pulled her mask down, shaking her head. "I've never seen someone dodge like that without even lifting a finger." Danica remained where she had been, her eyes locked with Simmons' now reddening face as he stumbled back 2 steps, clutching the arm that had gone numb from his failed attempt. His lips pressed tight, trying to hide the sting of humiliation under public scrutiny. A flash of anger cut through his eyes, mixed with the confusion of someone not used to losing control. His cheeks flared with color, as if slapped by the murmuring crowd that was now clearly against him. A young man raised his phone higher, filming everything, muttering on repeat, "It's live streaming. Over 3,000 viewers already and climbing." The humiliation boiling inside Simmons needed somewhere to go. He turned sharply to Reeves, wordless but pleading for backup. Reeves just shrugged, lips tight in something that looked like a smirk but offered no solidarity. Danica said nothing. She adjusted her shirt sleeve where his grip had displaced it, her movement slow and deliberate. Her calm was a second blow to Simmons, who had just failed to overpower a woman half his size with twice the poise. "You're obstructing an officer," he barked, voice hoarse with suppressed rage. Danica lifted her chin and met his eyes. I was avoiding being assaulted. Maybe you should learn how to approach a person without treating them like prey." Applause erupted from across the street. A girl in a red hoodie clapped 3 times, then raised her fist like she was cheering for a champion in the ring. Simmons lunged forward again, more aggressively this time, his shoulders drawn tight like he needed to rewrite what just happened. But before he could act, Reeves cut in, his voice slicing the air. "I already reported the subject as possibly armed and non-compliant. Backup is en route." Danica turned to look at him, a flicker of grief rising in her eyes. "You're lying." Reeves shrugged. "I'm following protocol. Subject acts erratically and resists ID check. We assess for risk." An elderly woman pushed forward from the crowd, gripping her cane, eyes blazing. "She didn't do a damn thing. I've been here since the start. You're scared of her 'cause she walks straight, not 'cause she's armed. It's all recorded. Every bit," another young woman added, holding up her phone as living proof. Simmons glanced toward the phone's lens, catching his every expression. In that moment, he realized Danica's silence was her most dangerous weapon. In the age of live streams and digital witnesses, every frame could be evidence, or the spark that burned a reputation to ash. Danica said nothing more. She turned slightly, her back now to the wall, hands resting lightly in front of her as if waiting for a bus. But within that stillness was a signal, loud and unmistakable. She was ready. Simmons, seemingly recognizing it, stepped back half a pace, his hand still on the radio. Reeves leaned in again, this time whispering just loud enough for Simmons to hear. "Careful. She knows how to own the stage." In the distance, sirens began to rise. A wail of backup units closing in. The crowd stirred. Someone shouted, "What? They're sending in armored trucks now?" Up front, Simmons tightened his jaw, eyes darting across the street. His face burned crimson, not just from fury but shame. To be thrown off balance by a single shift of weight in front of dozens of witnesses and thousands more watching live was a disgrace he had never endured before. Fueled by humiliation and a bruised ego, Simmons lunged at Danica, all pretense of professionalism gone. The steel flash of the handcuffs gleamed in the light. One of Danica's wrists was already locked against the metal post of a parking sign, her other hand twisting away as Simmons tried to grab it. Physical restraint couldn't break mental resolve. Her gaze stayed locked on him, and in it was fire, a quiet defiance burning to extinguish the arrogance he mistook for authority. Simmons growled through clenched teeth and swung the cuffs toward her free wrist, but Danica pivoted with precision. A sharp, fluid motion, she slipped to the right, leveraging her hips and the locked wrist as a pivot, dropping her weight with a sudden knee bend. It was so fast that the eye could barely follow. Before Simmons even realized it, he was off balance, flung forward, his face slamming into the concrete with a crack that echoed like a slap of truth. The crowd roared. The cuffed wrist bit into Danica's skin, drawing blood from her fingertips, but her face stayed composed. Her voice came steady, trained, like someone who'd held the line when chaos broke loose. "You just assaulted a veteran on American soil," she said, her voice ringing like a steel bell. "You crossed the line between law enforcement and unlawful violence. And you think you'll walk away from it?" Reeves stepped back completely now, clutching the radio at his shoulder, his voice shaky as he called in, "Unit 2B15, situation escalating. Suspect has assaulted an officer. Repeat, officer down. Requesting immediate support, rapid response, level 3 alert." Inside, Reeves was spinning. Fear, disbelief, frustration. He had just watched his partner, the one who prided himself on restoring order, get taken down by the very woman they both dismissed as fragile. Worse, it was all being streamed live, from at least 3 angles. View counts surged with every second. Voices rippled through the crowd. A white guy in his 20s held up his phone. eyes locked on the screen. "She didn't do anything wrong. I've been filming since the start. I'll testify if needed." A middle-aged woman at the newsstand shouted, "Someone uncuff her. She's not the suspect. She's the victim." Danica let Simmons go, letting him slump to the pavement, his face flushed with pain and shame. He staggered upright, cursing under his breath, his forehead now bleeding, hair stuck to his sweat-slicked skin, eyes wild with hostility. "You'll pay for this," he muttered, barely audible under the rising sound of sirens. Danica exhaled, tugging her cuffed wrist close to avoid further injury. She lifted her chin, scanning the crowd. No smile, but her posture spoke volumes. "I'm still standing. I'm not alone." While Reeves shouted into the radio, spitting codes and panic, Danica turned back to the people around her. Her voice was clear, not loud, but anchored with strength. "If any of you have a video from the beginning, please hold on to it. What you witnessed wasn't assaulting an officer. It was a citizen defending herself against unlawful force." The woman holding the live stream nodded hard. "We've got it. The clip's already out there." She was cuffed before he even laid a hand on her. The truth, like water after a storm, was beginning to settle into shape, and at the center of it all stood Danica, one wrist bloodied, sweat on her brow, but steady as if she'd just executed a field maneuver in a training drill. A siren shrieked at the end of the street. 3 more patrol cars sped in, lights flashing red and blue across the buildings. Reeves stood with his hands clasped behind his back, trying to recover his composure, but his feet shuffled slightly as though even he wanted distance from the mess he helped create. Simmons remained slumped, breathing in his humiliation. Danica straightened, her free hand bracing the cuffed wrist against her torso. She looked at Reeves again, not with hope, but with the clarity of someone who now fully understood no backup would come from behind the badge, and that only made her stance stronger. Whatever the next step was, a station, a courtroom, a camera lens, she would face it the same way she had faced every battlefield, as herself. Lieutenant Danica Morgan, a soldier who had once fought for freedom, and now stood, unshaken, to defend her dignity on the soil she served. 3 police cruisers screeched to a halt at the top of the street, kicking up a cloud of dust like an artificial storm in the sweltering midday heat. Car doors flung open. Heavy black boots slammed against the pavement in what felt more like a ceremony of dominance than procedure. Officers with riot shields and hands resting on their holstered weapons surged toward Danica Morgan, the lone woman standing at the center of it all, one wrist still cuffed to a metal parking sign. No questions, no attempt at negotiation. All they saw was a black woman overpowering a white officer, and that was enough to neutralize the threat protocol. "Hands up! Surrender immediately!" barked a commanding voice. A drawn firearm pointed squarely at Danica. She didn't flinch. Sweat beaded at her brow, sliding down her temple, but her gaze held firm. The steel cuff on her left wrist clinked with each shift of her stance, a cold reminder that control was still, technically, not hers. She knew that, but she also knew she couldn't let them rewrite the narrative. "She assaulted Simmons," Reeves shouted, his voice cracked with urgency like he truly believed the lie he was now building. "She's armed, non-compliant, claiming to be spec ops. I witnessed everything." Simmons, still sitting on the ground where Danica had released him, clutched his shoulder with one hand while trying to push himself upright with the other. His face was beet red, and he growled through clenched teeth, "She's a danger to the force. I demand immediate detainment." Danica scanned the scene. Every eye was on her, guns, shields, phone cameras, and skeptical stares from the neighbors on both sidewalks. Every glance cut like a blade, dragging up the old ache of being judged before being heard. This was no longer about her and Simmons. It was a full-scale drill, powered by a system that defaulted to violence whenever someone dared to stay standing. The circle tightened. One officer stepped forward, voice flat, almost rehearsed. "You have one chance to get on your knees and place your hands on your head." Danica didn't move, didn't tremble, but inside, her heart beat like a drum in the quiet. On one side, dignity and truth. On the other hand, a dozen triggers were waiting to be pulled because she refused to perform like the perfect victim. Then, slicing through the suffocating tension, came a voice. Male, deep, deliberate. "Hold on! Is that Lieutenant Morgan?" The officers froze, guns shifting toward the man stepping out of the command vehicle. He was in his early 40s, solid frame, uniform pressed, glasses reflecting the blinding sun, and beneath them, eyes wide with recognition. Eli Calder. Danica recognized him instantly. Memory surged. Her years as a SEAL instructor in Norfolk, where she led a cross-training program for law enforcement. Eli had been one of her trainees, quiet, disciplined, always offering a respectful nod after each session. He moved quickly, signaling the team to lower their weapons. "That's Lieutenant Danica Morgan, former Navy SEAL. I confirm her identity." A ripple of disbelief swept through the crowd. Phones were lifted higher. Voices rose in protest. "She is Spec Ops. She's saved lives in war zones. Y'all serious?" Eli stopped in front of Danica, eyes on the cuff biting into her wrist, then turned to Simmons. "You did this?" Simmons looked away, but Reeves stood firm, voice flat. "She failed to comply with an ID check, exhibited erratic behavior. We followed protocol." "What protocol tells you to cuff a veteran with no threat display?" Eli snapped, voice loud enough to slice the air. He pulled out his key, released the cuff. The metal dropped away, leaving behind a raw red mark, like a scar from the past tearing into the present. But Danica didn't crumble. She nodded. No words, just a look of gratitude. Sharp, measured, real. The street erupted. Cheers rang out. A brown-skinned woman, pushing a stroller, shouted, "Y'all needed backup for one woman?" An elderly man in a torn ball cap bellowed, "Lived here 60 years. Never seen anything this shameful." Live streams exploded across platforms. Viewer counts soared. The story, once buried under administrative language and cold steel, now stood in the light, thanks to one man who chose truth over silence. Danica tightened the strap of her bag, looked at Eli. "Thanks for remembering." Eli met her gaze, his eyes bright behind the glare of sun and glass. "I remember because you were fair, and today I couldn't ignore injustice." That line, short, perfect, drew another wave of applause. But this time it wasn't just for Danica. It was for something bigger. The clear, undeniable truth that justice didn't always come from the system. But when one person stood at the right time, it could still be saved. And Danica, standing in the center of the roar and rising hope, knew one thing for certain. Today, she hadn't stood in vain. The cuff had just been removed from Danica's wrist, but the raw red imprint it left still pulsed under her skin. Behind her, the crowd lingered on the sidewalk, eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and fury, like they couldn't quite process that what had just unfolded in America in 2025 so closely resembled a reenactment of the 1960s. The only difference now, every camera was already in someone's pocket. Police Chief Gerald Rourke, a bald white man in a sharply tailored suit rather than a uniform, stepped out of the command-marked SUV. He approached with deliberate calm, his face a blend of dispassion and PR awareness, like someone attending a policy hearing, not the aftermath of a public crisis. After a brief exchange with Eli Calder, his eyes scanned the scene. Phone cameras, Simmons's bloodied sleeve, the tension in the air. Everything was processed with the eye of a man trained more in media strategy than in justice. "Officer Simmons is suspended pending review. Turn in all body cam footage," he ordered flatly, as if reading from a memo. Then, to Danica, "Lieutenant Morgan, we'd like to bring you to the station to complete the protocol, just some details to verify. You'll be treated with the utmost respect." Danica gave a slight nod. The wind pulled gently at the creases of her shirt, chilling her skin like a whisper of warning. But with dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see how she would respond, Danica chose to step into the car. The Baton Rouge Police Department headquarters stood wide on a broad boulevard, crowned by a towering flagpole and a gleaming brass sign that read, "To serve and protect," a phrase that once moved her in a civic ethics lecture as a girl now rang hollow. They didn't take her to the store, not to an official meeting room either. Just a white room, soundproof walls, a ceiling camera, one metal table, 2 chairs, no photos, no water. No one asked if she needed a lawyer. No one asked if she wanted to call someone. 1 hour passed, then 2. The door opened as the clock hand ticked past 3. A white woman in her 40s stepped in, hair tied back, beige button-up shirt, nameplate pinned. Lena Ford, Internal Personnel Coordinator. No badge, no gun. But her posture made clear this wasn't a conversation. "Lieutenant Morgan," Lena began, setting down a thin file. "We're reviewing the full incident to ensure every side is heard fairly." Danica said nothing. Her eyes followed Lena's smallest movements. The glance at the folder, the faint twitch of her mouth at the word fair. Those who use that word the most easily are usually the ones with power in hand. "We just want to understand a bit about your reactions," Lena continued, voice calm, almost sweet. "At that moment, would you say you felt threatened by the presence of 2 male officers?" Danica raised her head. The AC blew cold against her neck, but the chill she felt was buried deeper in the framing of the question itself. "Are you implying I reacted because of their gender?" "Oh, no." Lena tilted her head, smile soft, but eyes sharp with evaluation. "We just want to understand your subjective emotional state, so our report is as objective as possible. Perhaps, have you had negative experiences with officers before? Or with men in uniform? A velvet-lined trap." Danica slowly placed her hand on the table, fingertips brushing the cold steel surface. "I've trained dozens of men like them, on this soil and in places this country refuses to officially acknowledge. I've dragged a soldier from a burning Humvee because he panicked too hard to crawl. I've stood waist-deep in Afghan mud keeping a squad from collapsing." She paused, then added, steady, "You're asking if I have an issue with men in uniform? I've risked my life for them. What makes me cautious is when they walk in with their hands near weapons and eyes that say, 'My credentials mean nothing.'" Lena's brow twitched, but Danica didn't let the silence grow. "And what I felt wasn't anger, it was fatigue. The kind that comes from having to prove I'm worth believing, just because my skin doesn't fit someone's idea of safety." Lena pressed her lips together, jotting down a few lines in the file, gestures of someone who knew they'd just collected what they needed, information to reshape the story. The door opened again 10 minutes later. A male officer appeared, telling Danica she was free to go. They might reach out for further clarification. No apology, no record, no receipt. As she stepped out into the fading daylight, the last glow of afternoon bathed the concrete steps in amber. Danica paused. Everything inside her was clear now. The so-called debrief was never about truth. It was a mechanism to cool public tension, to perform control while pretending transparency. Simmons might face suspension, but her dignity remained in limbo, somewhere between an internal memo and the next misleading headline, and she knew this wasn't the end. The game would go on. The only difference now, Danica would be the one setting the rules. When Eli Calder returned to the cold glass-walled room where Danica sat, there was a weight behind his eyes. He carried a thin file and his phone, nodded briefly to the officer at the door, and stepped inside like nothing outside the room mattered anymore. The door closed behind him slowly, like the final period of 2 hours of frozen, solitary waiting. "It's done, Lieutenant Morgan," Eli said. His voice was calm, but something clung to the back of his throat. Danica stood, as steady as ever, but a flicker in her gaze betrayed what she already understood. The deepest wounds weren't left by physical blows, but by the quiet, polished complicity of a system that knew how to weaponize silence and language. On the walk to the car, Eli spoke low. "They suspended Simmons, but no one's even mentioning Reeves. I get the sense they're waiting, watching to see how the media moves. If the heat dies down, he walks. I don't trust any of them, Danica." She nodded. "I don't trust anyone either, but I have my way." Eli didn't press further. He handed her the file, a record of her detainment process, but some parts were mysteriously missing. No mention of Lena Ford, no trace of the psychological interview. Danica flipped through it like she was reading a version of herself rewritten for easy consumption, sanitized to soothe public outrage. Outside, the city moved on, but somewhere online, the undercurrent had already begun to rise. Tucker Reeves, the one who hadn't faced consequences, had leaked body cam footage. The clip was grainy, but the content was clear. Danica spinning and twisting Simmons' arm, sending him off balance. The earlier footage, his grip, the pressure, the provocation, was gone. What remained was a 15-second highlight, dramatic and decontextualized. And then it appeared on a far-right forum. The headline screamed, "Black ex-SEAL assaults cop. How far will victimhood go?" Within hours, it was everywhere. Tens of thousands of shares. An online storm thick with bloodlust and racial resentment. The comments were bile and barbed wire. "Told you. They always blame the cops. If she's SEAL trained, that move was deliberate. Who still believes in this so-called equality? Huh?" No one asked what happened first. No one verified why a black woman was surrounded by armed officers. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a symbol. Someone to project their fear onto. Someone to blame for the slow erosion of the world they thought they controlled. Danica saw the video when a friend sent her a message with 3 words. "They've started already." She sat in her small temporary apartment near the train station, the blue light of the screen casting shadows on a face now carved in steel. No one saw the whiteness of her clenched knuckles, but beneath her calm exterior, a quiet quake was splitting open. Local media began to respond cautiously. A conservative evening broadcast ran a headline, "Combat Veteran or Danger to Public." The anchor smirked. "We're not making conclusions, but if she's really SEAL, wouldn't a violent response be expected?" That line aired during prime time, nestled between commercials for antacids and insurance, as if a woman who once fought for her country was now a public threat simply because she resisted an illegal handcuff. Danica looked away from the screen, her lips pressed tight. The rage didn't explode. It crystallized. It cooled into something sharper. She knew, from the moment that video aired, this wasn't about the streets of Baton Rouge anymore. This had moved into police offices, newsrooms, and the minds of millions now debating whether she deserved dignity. But she couldn't back down. Not out of pride, but because every unchecked lie would calcify into the foundation of a false history. And if repeated enough, that history would replace the truth, as it always had. Danica checked the time, then opened her laptop. She began drafting a statement. Not long, not angry, just precise, just real. A clear account of the incident, noting that she never initiated force, including images of her military ID, and quoting Officer Eli Calder's confirmation. She sent it to 3 neutral media outlets, and a copy to her late mother's former attorney. Then she picked up the phone. Her voice was low, steady, unwavering. "This is Lieutenant Danica Morgan. I need to schedule a meeting with the ACLU." That night, the wind from the Mississippi drifted in through the cracked window, whispering like the tired breath of a city that had never truly healed. But inside that room, something was forming. Within just 1 hour of the edited video's release, social media ignited into an uncontrollable storm. The hashtag #seal assaulting cops shot to the top of the trending charts, followed by thousands of outraged comments. Blurry footage from the cropped body cam clip, missing its beginning and end, spread like wildfire, now overlaid with a chilling voiceover. This is what happens when the military is politicized. An officer trained for war now humiliating those who protect our streets. On a conservative evening news broadcast, the 8 p.m. anchor opened with the moment Danica twisted Simmons' arm, asking solemnly, "Can a black woman, trained like a human weapon, still be considered an ordinary citizen? Or is she the embodiment of anti-police extremism in the guise of honor?" Danica sat in her temporary apartment arranged by Eli, watching the footage not with surprise, but with the slow resolve of someone used to having her image distorted by people who never bothered to ask who she truly was. Her phone rang on and off, most calls from blocked numbers. The messages were predictable. Threats, slurs, one stating, "Next time we'll make sure you don't walk away, you traitorous bitch." Her inbox was filled with emails carrying the same venom. Her social media accounts were flagged repeatedly for political agitation. A day earlier, she had been a quiet symbol of courage. Now, after a few malicious edits, she had become a public scaffold for collective judgment. Eli messaged her, "The department's comms team is split. Be careful. Reeves isn't done." She set the phone down, lifting her gaze to the window. Baton Rouge at night flickered with red lights and the long shadows of trees, and somewhere within that darkness, something stirred inside her. Not fear, but a sense of endurance for the people who still stood with her, while conservative voices revealed in painting her as the aggressive black woman, a quieter resistance was rising. Several black veteran organizations released videos in support of Danica. One former teammate from her mission in Yemen posted a 7-minute clip, recalling the time Danica ran through gunfire to rescue a little girl trapped beneath rubble. "If Simmons represents order," he said, "then Danica is the reminder that real courage never waits for applause." Community platforms began sharing the full, uncut footage. But what struck Danica most was a message from a stranger. "I'm white, living in Kentucky. I used to believe in the right side, but because of you, I see now, it's not about uniforms. It's about how people act when no one's watching." Danica reread the message over and over as if it were a quiet affirmation carved in truth. Not all of America was blind. Some still had eyes clear enough to see past the fog of manipulated narratives into the stillness she had stood within. But outside her walls, the far right didn't want the truth. They wanted a scapegoat, a reason to lash out, a symbol to drag into the square and crucify beneath the hammer of bias. A few independent journalists reached out to her. "Would you like to go on record and tell your side?" Danica didn't answer immediately. She knew the timing wasn't right. Speaking now would only feed the fire. She needed facts, strategy. She had to wait for the fury to crack. She spent most of that evening with Eli, going over the evidence, footage from neighborhood cameras he was trying to retrieve, witness names, and timestamps. Danica took notes with military precision, studying light angles, timelines, and the exact moment Reeves began leaking falsehoods. She had no PR team, no press secretary, but she had the eyes of a soldier trained in battlefield analysis, enough to spot a tactic before the enemy even formed ranks. The next morning, she walked into a small print shop on the corner. She printed stills from the unedited footage, witness statements, visual breakdowns. She laid them out piece by piece like a mission briefing, not with bullets but with facts. In a world racing to embrace falsehoods, holding to the truth had become an act of resistance. Danica knew. Justice doesn't always arrive in a roar. Sometimes it comes from the footsteps of those who refuse to retreat. Behind her, the wall she had once been pinned against by Simmons was now covered with tape-up printouts, photos, notes, timelines, and links. A counter-campaign had begun, quiet, small, but surgical. And this time, Danica wasn't alone. That morning, as sunlight spilled over the low rooftops of Baton Rouge, a small tweet slipped into the deafening noise of the media storm. Amid sensational headlines, choppy sound bites, and anonymous rage, it almost disappeared, yet it carried the quiet weight of a first bell rung. A user named Gwendolyn Foster, an older woman, posted a 3-minute video. In the frame, she sat on a wooden chair on her porch, silver hair neatly pinned up, her eyes looking directly into the camera. Her voice was calm, steady, not trembling, not angry, just tired. "My name is Gwendolyn Foster. Last year, my boy, he's 12, was stopped by Officer Simmons on his way to school. He said my son had a suspicious walk and then tore through his backpack without any kind of warrant. Within the hour, the clip was shared tens of thousands of times." The comments swelled. "I've seen him harass kids by the park too. Someone's got to stop this. Why does a man like that still carry a gun?" A domino effect began. Stories long buried surfaced from the people of Baton Rouge, once silent witnesses who thought they were alone, now finding themselves part of a collective voice. That afternoon, another video surfaced. A soft-spoken, brown-skinned man in a wrinkled white shirt stood outside an old church. "My name is Pastor Marcus Lane. Back in 2021, Simmons shoved me onto the pavement when I was trying to explain I'd lost my wallet and didn't have ID. I filed a complaint. No one ever followed up. His video caught on like wildfire. Beyond anger, there was something heavier in his voice, a sorrow that clung like dust to the heart of someone who had once believed in justice and had watched it walk away. One by one, the puzzle came together. A young woman spoke about being threatened with arrest for walking in a hoodie after dark. A single mother recounted her car being searched without cause in front of a grocery store. A delivery worker recalled being forced to sit on a curb for safety protocol. Dozens, then hundreds of testimonies formed a mosaic. Simmons was not a rogue actor. He was the natural result of a system that quietly enabled control through fear. But none of this happened randomly. Danica, with her trained mind and unyielding resolve, had been quietly reaching out. She'd tracked down former victims who'd once appeared in brief news blurbs. She called them, listened carefully, recorded their stories with permission, and shared only what they allowed. Many hesitated when they first saw her message. They were afraid of retaliation, of public exposure. But when they heard her voice, calm, direct, never incendiary, they said yes. One elderly woman, who'd been fined for planting vegetables on public land, said, "I kept quiet for 10 years, but seeing her, standing there, surrounded by all those officers and not flinching, I figured it was time I did my part too." The media began to shift. Independent outlets reopened Simmons's old records. Newspapers that once regurgitated police press releases launched a new column, Voices of Baton Rouge. Each entry included names, photos, and official documents, evidence no one had bothered to dig up until now. Civil rights organizations, state, and federal legal advocacy groups joined the fray. A group called Justice in Uniform opened a dedicated hotline for anyone who had been harassed by Simmons or his fellow officers. Within 48 hours, they logged over 300 calls. On the third day, Eli Calder, the only officer who had stood beside Danica, arrived at her door. In his hands was a thick stack of documents. "This is everything Internal Affairs pulled in 3 days," he said. "There'll be more. But what you've done, you gave the truth room to breathe." Danica took the folder without a word, but in her silence there was more strength than any shout. The main conference room at Baton Rouge Police Headquarters was flooded with sterile white light, but no brightness could bleach out the tension that thickened between the people seated around the long table. On the wall, a large screen replayed the same videos over and over. First, the edited clip, then the full version that had spread over the last few days. Every frame was a drill bit boring into the department's already cracking image, shattering not just trust, but the illusion of order they had long worked to maintain. Chief Gerald Rourke stood at the head of the room, arms crossed tightly. His expression wasn't from lack of clarity. It was from the weight of too many contradictions. He knew full well this wasn't about one officer and one citizen anymore. It was a tectonic shift that threatened to fracture faith in the entire force and the institution he was sworn to lead. "I think it's time the department made a unified statement," Lieutenant Parsons said dryly. "We can't let one individual, regardless of their background, damage the reputation of this entire force." Across the table, Tucker Reeves sat back, his eyes flashing. The slight upward twitch of his lips revealed quiet satisfaction. He nodded slowly, feigning thoughtfulness, though his gaze cut sharply across the room, aimed directly at Eli Calder, the only officer who hadn't turned away these past few days. Eli rose, slow and deliberate. His voice was clear, his tone like stone carving into air. "So what you're saying, Lieutenant Parson, is that the problem lies not with the officers who pinned a woman to a wall and cuffed her in broad daylight, not with those who doctored radio logs and fed lies to the public, but with the woman who stood her ground." Parsons' mouth tightened. A ripple of side glances passed around the table, a few eyebrows raised, a few fingers tapped nervously, all signs of the deep fracture widening beneath them. Reeves shrugged. "Look, Calder, I get it. She's impressive. Who wouldn't be moved by a strong woman with a stellar record? But she still twisted an officer's arm on the street. That part didn't change." Eli narrowed his eyes. "And the full video, you remember that, right? You want to talk about context, about the part where she was restrained first, cuffed before any violence? Or do you want to claim it's AI generated, like the far-right trolls screaming conspiracy online?" Reeves smiled, but it was tight, forced. His voice was edged with irritation. "Watch yourself, Calder. I've been here longer than you. I know how this department plays out." Rourke raised a hand. The room stilled. He stepped closer to the screen, pausing it at the frame where Danica stood trapped between two officers. "We are in dangerous waters," he said, voice gravelly with exhaustion. "So I want to know, right here, right now, does anyone in this room believe the response we gave was appropriate procedure?" No hands rose. The silence was a quiet indictment in itself. "Good," Rourke continued. "Then I'm calling for an independent review committee, community representatives included, and Officer Eli Calder will serve as one of the oversight leads." Tucker clapped slowly, 3 hollow pats that rang like shell casings on concrete. "Going public with this might be a double-edged sword, Chief," he said. "One officer's mistake shouldn't define the entire department. You'll kill morale." Eli stepped forward, staring him down. "What kills morale is watching the truth get bent to protect our own. Decay doesn't come from the outside. It starts when we fall silent about what's wrong." The room stiffened. But this time, a few heads turned toward Eli, not away. A young officer nodded faintly. Another tapped their pen, less sharply. The crack was widening between those who wanted to preserve an image and those who wanted to save a soul. Eli sat down, eyes still locked on Reeves. Rourke nodded. Then it settled. The investigation will proceed, and this time, justice, not rank, will determine what comes next. Baton Rouge didn't change that day, but a fracture had opened, and sometimes the only way for light to enter is through the cracks in the wall. The internal file on Blake Simmons sat neatly on Chief Gerald Rourke's desk. Dry pages on the surface, but each line hit like a punch to the chest. Beneath the basics, name, birth date, assignment history, evaluation reports. There it was, a section rarely read closely. Ethnicity, in italicized print, mixed, Dominican-Haitian descent. Rourke straightened. His eyes narrowed. He turned to his admin assistant, voice low but sharp. How many times has he updated his personnel file? A few keystrokes. The reply came quickly. 3 times. Each time the racial identification changed. First, Hispanic. Second, other. Most recent, white. The room seemed to stall. Rourke stared at the screen for a long moment, then flipped to an old academy photo of Simmons, attached to his original training file. His skin, light brown, hair, loose curls, strong jawline, unmistakably Caribbean. It was a far cry from the Simmons of today. Shaved head, lightened complexion, voice tuned to match the southern white officer mold. Rourke murmured under his breath. He erased himself. For a moment, he saw it clearly. Not just the fear, but the rot. A man of Dominican-Haitian descent forced to pass as white to survive in a system that would have rejected him otherwise. And in choosing survival, Simmons had become the worst caricature of power. Bigoted, cruel, and willing to destroy anyone who looked like the man in his old ID photo. Rourke called out, "Get Officer Reeves in here. Now." 5 minutes later, Tucker Reeves stood before him. Still polished, still postured, but now with an edge of unease he couldn't mask. Rourke stared at him. "Did you know Simmons is of Haitian descent?" Reeves froze. His mouth opened, then shut. Finally, he replied, voice slightly off, "Sir, I had no idea." Rourke nodded slowly, then slid the file across the desk. "You do now." Reeves picked it up. His eyes flicked down the page. He paused at the race field, then in the photo. When he looked up, his face was pale, conflicted. Not because the truth shocked him, but because it shattered a loyalty he thought was built on sameness. Simmons had played the part, said the right things, used the right code words. Reeves muttered, "I should have been told. We trusted him." Rourke cut him off, his voice, for the first time, full of open disdain. "You didn't trust him. You trusted the mask. You believed in the version of him that mirrored your comfort zones, the strict talk, the dog whistles about order and non-compliance. You didn't care who he was, only that he was willing to step on others, especially black civilians. That was enough. Silence. Heavy. Bitter. Reeves tried to recover, but what Danica did was self-defense. Rourke snapped. His voice was cold, surgical. "And now I'm asking myself, how many times have men like you bent the truth the same way? How many cases were buried? How many people are forced to bite their tongues just because they didn't look right to you?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Get out. And if I hear about any interference in the investigation, I'll write the damn complaint myself to the state board." Reeves left stiffly, eyes fixed ahead, his world tilted by the collapse of a lie he hadn't realized he was living in. Rourke stayed seated, staring once more at the file. Simmons wasn't just a symptom. He had chosen to maintain the disease. In a society stratified by color, the greatest tragedy isn't always oppression from the outside. It's choosing to betray your roots to blend into the power that once mocked your bloodline. That afternoon, Rourke signed the order expanding the internal probe. All misconduct cases during Simmons' tenure were to be reviewed. More critically, every racial bias complaint denied in the past 5 years, especially those signed off by Tucker Reeves, was to be reopened. A pressure vein had ruptured, and, from here, the truth would no longer stay buried under the shield of false honor. Just after sunset, as darkness crept through the old rooftops of Baton Rouge, the shadows reached every corner of the tiny kitchen where Uncle Raymond usually had his black tea at night. The lamp's soft yellow glow spilled over stacks of paper, records, logs, metadata, a quiet mountain of fatigue and facts waiting for release. Eli Calder sat across from Danica, who had barely spoken since the tense internal meeting. Neither of them touched their cold coffee, but the silence between them pulsed, thick with the sense that truth was ready to step fully into the light. After hours spent combing through the department's archives, tracing hidden logs and fragments of metadata thought to be deleted, Eli found what even Reeves hadn't anticipated: the full, uncut body cam footage. It had been tucked inside a triple encrypted drive, flagged by a former tech who once owed Eli a favor before transferring out. A coincidence? Or a crack in a system not yet fully rotten? Danica didn't know, but she knew this much. Whatever it was, it had opened a door to a more powerful resistance, one grounded in intellect and integrity. On the screen, timestamps flickered, file paths, frame ratios, dropped audio markers, all technical trails leading to one conclusion. The video Reeves released had been manipulated, selectively trimmed, deliberately distorted. Eli flipped through the annotated breakdown, pointing out where sound had been clipped, how the frame delay masked who initiated contact. Danica leaned forward, eyes sharpening with every detail. She didn't need Eli's final word. Deep down she already knew this was the moment to stop defending and start commanding. The laptop opened without hesitation. She typed in a familiar sequence, an encrypted forum where she and other veterans shared protected files and whistleblower reports. On the blank white interface, she uploaded the raw video, the military ID held up, the grip on her wrist, the spin, the watching crowd. No filters, no edits, just reality. She attached the full technical report, frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp, a declaration and data. The truth had been restored, and this time, no one would rewrite it. At the bottom of her screen, the clock turned 12:01. A new day, and the exact moment when truth finally stepped into the storm it deserved to face. Within an hour, the first responses trickled in, isolated at first, cautious. But then a tweet appeared from an account marked with the Navy veteran's emblem. "We've reviewed the full footage. Lieutenant Morgan did not initiate force. She was surrounded, threatened, and upheld the discipline of a soldier." Then came a law professor from Howard University, analyzing the footage frame by frame. "If this qualifies as aggressive behavior, then our legal definitions of violence need rewriting." And then the tide broke. No more trickles. A flood. Blake Simmons became the face of systemic abuse. Once untouchable, now unraveled under the weight of clarity. But it didn't stop there. Tucker Reeves, the man in the background, the one who spoke softly into a radio while the scene escalated, suddenly found himself named, cited, and dissected on independent watchdog platforms. In the video, his face betrayed little, but it was that quiet detachment, his calm voice saying possibly armed, that marked him as the symbol of institutional complicity. A veteran journalist tweeted dryly, "The most dangerous man isn't always the one holding the gun, It's the one whispering threat into his mic. Clips from the full footage began to spread. Danica's wrist held tightly, her disappointment when Reeves arrived, Simmons shouting in blind rage. Each moment became a spark in a country already dry with anger over race and power. Under the posts, a call echoed louder with every share. Suspend Reeves. Open a full investigation. It didn't stop there. Retired officers, both black and white, began sharing their accounts. Stories of abuse of power by fellow officers, internal meetings silenced in the name of department image, and voices long buried under fear of retaliation. This time, they spoke with Danica's story as their mirror. The Baton Rouge Police Department found itself under siege, not by riots, but by an avalanche of questions that could no longer be ignored. Their public inbox was flooded. Their social media posts were overrun with angry reactions and questions once too dangerous to ask. Who authorized the edited video? Why wasn't the accused officer suspended immediately? One popular blogger wrote, "Truth is like blood. It finds a way to flow, no matter how many layers of ice try to seal it. And this time, it's staining the face of a system that thought it would always stay pure white." That night, while the department's media team scrambled in an emergency meeting, a photo began circulating across the internet. Danica Morgan, dressed in civilian clothes, standing quietly outside police headquarters among a small crowd. Her eyes were steady. In her hands, a stack of documents. No banners, no slogans, just undeniable evidence. The caption beneath it was simple. She didn't need to shout. The truth spoke for her. As public pressure crested, the Baton Rouge Police Department was forced to respond. A hastily arranged press conference was announced. Behind the podium stood Chief Gerald Rourke, flanked by tight-lipped members of the legal and communications teams. He no longer wore his uniform, just a pale gray shirt and a loosely knotted tie. The backdrop read "Restoring Public Trust," a quiet, overdue confession. After reviewing the unedited body cam footage in its entirety, he began, voice slow and deliberate, each word a nail hammered into the floor. The Baton Rouge Police Department formally acknowledges serious failures in our handling of the incident involving Lieutenant Danica Morgan. Every camera in the room turned toward him. Effective immediately, officers Blake Simmons and Tucker Reeves are permanently dismissed from duty. Their full files are being handed over to the State Special Prosecutor's Office for potential criminal prosecution. The room froze, but Rourke went on. Lieutenant Morgan suffered both physical and emotional harm in a situation that should never have occurred. Therefore, the city of Baton Rouge will offer a civil settlement to her, and mandatory anti-bias and civil rights training will be implemented department-wide. Days later, the district court held a public hearing, not to argue facts, but to formalize restitution and assign legal accountability. Danica walked into the courtroom beside Eli Calder, the one person who had stood with her from the start. Across the aisle, Blake Simmons sat slumped. His once polished hair was now a tangled mess, his face pale, hands trembling as he signed the official documents. The power that once burned in his eyes was gone, replaced by the hollow glint of fear and quiet regret. Tucker Reeves stood beside him, face expressionless, but his collar was damp with sweat. Not once during the entire hearing did he look in Danica's direction. The judge read the decision aloud, voice clear and resonant. Based on the evidence presented, the defendants, Blake Simmons and Tucker Reeves, are hereby held liable for all physical damages, medical costs, emotional distress, and legal expenses incurred by Lieutenant Danica Morgan. Total restitution, $1.75 million, payable within 90 days. The courtroom held its breath. Danica didn't smile. She didn't bow her head. She simply watched the two men who once believed that a badge could shield them from the truth. As the hearing closed, Simmons looked at her one last time, but there was no arrogance left in his gaze, only the stunned confusion of a man who had once believed his radio and paperwork could rewrite reality. Outside the courthouse, Danica declined press interviews. She gave no statements. She simply stepped onto the stone steps where a small group of citizens stood waiting. An elderly white woman stepped forward, embraced her gently, and whispered through trembling lips, "You did what we should have done a long time ago." 2 weeks after the final court hearing, the 6-minute and 12-second body cam video, once the spark of national outrage, was now part of the official curriculum at a high school in eastern Maryland. The course was called Civics and Justice, a new elective born from the storm of liberal arts reform debates. The class began with a simple question. What would you do if you witnessed injustice on a crowded street? On the projector screen, the moment Danica was cuffed, then countered with the precision of someone who had endured hundreds of hours of military training, played in slow motion. Below it, students watched, some with awe, some in silence. Their teacher, Ms. Keaton, paused the video just as Danica looked into the lens. Her voice dropped to a hush. What allows someone to stay calm when surrounded, insulted, and misjudged? Is it just training, or is it something deeper? Something forged from loss and a belief in something bigger than themselves? That afternoon, Keaton received a folded note written on notebook paper. It was from Caleb, a 9th grader with strawberry blonde hair, freckles across his cheeks, and a voice that stumbled whenever he read aloud in class. Inside, he wrote, "Ms. Morgan is the first person who made me understand that strength isn't about knocking someone down. It's about not falling when lies surround you. I used to think justice was for grown-ups. I don't think that anymore." Danica read that letter on a quiet Saturday morning, sitting on a city bus headed from downtown Baton Rouge to the South End. The breeze through the open window carried scents of fresh-cut grass and sunburned asphalt. On the seat beside her, a small bouquet of white lilies was wrapped in newspaper. The bus stopped near Shady Rest Cemetery. Danica stepped off and walked slowly along the stone path worn by 2 rainy seasons. She came to the headstone of Lorraine Morgan, her mother, buried beneath a canopy of old oaks. No medals had been laid there, no televised tribute, just a quiet patch of earth marking the end of a life lost to a medical system too indifferent to care. Danica knelt, placing the lilies at the base of the headstone. No speeches, no theatrics, only a whisper carried by the wind. "I did it, Mama. I stood my ground, this time in front of them all." From her pocket, she pulled Caleb's letter and laid it next to the flowers. "So you'll see," she thought, "that the sacrifice of one can plant the belief in another." In the distance, sunlight pierced through the leaves, fallen onto the ground, once forgotten, once a footnote in local history. But now it felt like the beginning of something larger, a place where memory no longer lay buried, but was illuminated by the actions of the next generation. Danica stood, brushed the dust from her knees, and walked away from the grave, not to leave the pain behind, but because she knew her mother would always walk ahead, in every act of justice, in every unwavering step, and in the eyes of a child who had just learned that courage doesn't come from blood or muscle, but from choosing what's right, even when that choice leaves you standing alone. One early summer afternoon, soft sunlight spilled across the wooden porch of a small house on the southern edge of Baton Rouge. The tongue tree in the yard swayed gently in the breeze, and the sound of cicadas rang out faintly in the distance, as if lulling the neighborhood into a quiet sleep. On an old, white-painted wooden chair, Danica sat with a cup of mint tea in hand, eyes following the sparrows chirping around the small water tray by the window. Months had passed since the trial, since the video that exploded across the media, since the moment she walked out of the courtroom not with a medal, but with a verdict that left a lasting imprint on those who once stood on the sidelines. More importantly, It was a reminder that simply existing comes with a responsibility. With part of the compensation from the lawsuit, Danica founded the Lorraine Fund, named after her mother, intending to support scholarships for underprivileged black students, especially those pursuing law, health care, or community safety. To her, it wasn't just financial aid, it was a way to restore belief in the system from the roots up. Each time a new application arrived, Danica took time to read every line, every clumsy sentence from children who dreamed of becoming lawyers, doctors, or officers, yet were still labeled potential threats because of their skin. In their words, she saw herself, the young Danica trembling on the schoolyard, called a troublesome black girl just for asking a question that was too sharp. She didn't build a grand office, didn't hire a PR team, didn't invite reporters. Everything happened in this small house, simple but warm, like the dream she had always carried. That afternoon, as she organized a stack of scholarship applications, she heard a car pull up outside. The wooden door creaked open, and Eli Calder stepped in, holding an apple pie from their favorite bakery. He wore plain clothes, but his gaze carried the same resolve as the day he stood beside her in a ring of police. "I was going to email, but good news deserves pie," he smiled, setting it down. Danica nodded and didn't ask. She knew Eli would tell her, slowly but surely. "The department just passed a new policy," Eli began. "Every patrol officer must now complete training on implicit racial bias and nonviolent de-escalation. Your name is included as a case study for nonviolent response under extreme pressure. I think your mother would be proud." Danica looked at him for a long time, then exhaled quietly, her eyes falling to the tea in front of her. She thought of her mother, of the long hours she had to hold her breath, of the pleas that went unanswered in the quiet night, of the final voice that asked only for one more chance to live. "I hope she will be," she said softly. Later, as the sunlight faded on the lawn, Eli added, "You know, some of the kids who saw what happened that day on the street, a few of them said they don't avoid the police anymore. One little boy told his teacher, if someone like her wore the uniform, maybe things would be different." Danica went quiet. She wondered if one person could change anything. And then, in that moment, she understood. She didn't need to change the whole world, only to help one person believe that change was possible. Eli took a sip of tea, leaning back in the chair, his eyes drifting toward the front yard. There was a pause long enough that Danica thought he might change the subject, until he spoke again, gently, with thought in every word. "Do you want to know what happened to the other two?" Danica didn't answer immediately. She was still for a few seconds, then nodded. Not because she craved revenge, but because she needed to know what came after a chapter that began with injustice. Eli set down his cup, turning it absently with a familiar motion, and continued. "Simmons sold his suburban home to cover part of the settlement. He used to live in Oak Hill, yards trimmed perfectly, flags on every porch. Now he rents a cheap apartment near the industrial district. No one says hello." He paused, then added, "After the last hearing, I saw him leave the courthouse. Not cocky anymore. His suit was wrinkled, his collar crooked, eyes hollow. The press was watching, but he just walked straight ahead, head down, clutching his bag like he was afraid it might slip away, even though it held nothing but a few papers." Danica didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, only a quiet steadiness, as if watching the last piece of rust fall off a statue built on borrowed power. Eli went on, voice lower now. "As for Reeves, I heard his wife left right after the court declared him complicit. His 2 kids were pulled from school because classmates started teasing them. Lately, he's been driving for a delivery company, paid per job, no, insurance. I saw his photo on a far-right forum, trying to explain he was just following protocol. but even the extremists turned their backs, saying he was weak. Danica placed her palm on the old table, fingers tracing the worn grooves of the wood. The evening breeze slipped through the porch, carrying the scent of new leaves and bird song. "Justice doesn't always need a thunderous verdict," she said slowly. "Sometimes it comes through the quiet unraveling of every lie, until there's nowhere left to hide but your reflection in the mirror." The sun sank behind the trees, washing the porch in gold. Danica rose and stepped outside, letting the wind brush past her shoulders. In her hand, she held Caleb's letter, now slightly yellowed, its corners softened by time. She pinned it to the Lorraine Fund's small bulletin board beside a photo of her mother and switched on the warm porch light. From now on, more black children would believe in their dreams, not by fleeing fear, but by walking through it, just as she had. That day at Roosevelt High, the campus buzzed with youthful noise, but the final assembly of the day carried a tone entirely its own. All 8th and 9th graders gathered in the auditorium, decorated with motivational posters, American flags, and a large banner bearing the words, "Justice begins with understanding." Danica Morgan stood behind the curtain, quietly observing the faces of hundreds of children now focused on the stage, where her name was introduced as a special guest, former Special Forces officer, a woman who turned adversity into community strength. She walked out, not in uniform, not wearing medals, just a black woman in a dark blue shirt and simple flat shoes. But her steady stance and direct gaze silenced the entire room. Danica told them about a summer day, how a brief encounter between her and 2 police officers had sparked a movement. She didn't recount the trauma in vivid detail. Instead, she focused on choice, the choice not to retaliate, the choice to use intellect instead of fists, and above all, the choice to believe that change is possible when enough people choose to stand. The children listened intently, some with open mouths, some with furrowed brows, and a few with eyes beginning to reflect questions not yet formed into words. After the talk, Danica was invited outside for photos with the organizers. As she stood adjusting her hair, blown by the wind, a small hand tugged gently at the hem of her shirt. She turned. A young black boy, no older than 10, wearing a red jacket and a beanie tilted slightly to one side, looked up at her with eyes that were both timid and hopeful. "Were you scared?" he asked softly but clearly. Danica crouched down, resting her hands on his shoulders, looking him in the eye as if the whole world had paused. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Of course I was. Fear is real. It's like a light in the dark, like the sound of your heart pounding when you face something unknown. But courage isn't about not feeling afraid. Courage is choosing to step forward even when your legs are shaking. And when you walk with truth in your heart, fear is never big enough to stop you." The boy nodded slowly, lips pressed together like he was tucking something precious away. Danica gave his shoulder a gentle pat and watched as he ran back toward his group of friends. One child, one question, but it struck at the core of everything she had lived through and why she continued to rise and speak. On her way out of the school, Danica caught a glimpse through a hallway window. Students chatting animatedly, some pointing at a bulletin board where a lesson poster read, "Silence is complicity. Choose to speak." She turned away, feeling something lighter inside her. Danica didn't hope to turn every student there into an activist. She didn't expect them to walk through the bitterness she had tasted. What she gave those kids, and herself, was something simpler. The belief that they deserved to grow up in a country where intellect, integrity, and skin color don't stand on opposite sides of a battlefield. Danica Morgan's story didn't end with a verdict, nor with a grand ceremony. It continued in the eyes of children, in letters mailed from across the country, and in the quiet mornings when she stood before a class teaching young minds how to listen before judging, and how to stand tall without waiting for an apology, because she knew the sparks of change rarely begin in grand halls. Sometimes they ignite from a single small question asked under the schoolyard sun by a boy who once felt afraid but has now learned how not to back down. And that is hope. Danica Morgan's story is not merely a confrontation between a black woman and two police officers. It is a collision between human dignity and a system conditioned to judge by skin color and the audacity of standing tall. When the hand of authority tried to tighten its grip on the truth, Danica did not bow. She didn't fight back with rage, but with poise, discipline, and the clear resolve of someone who had already survived battlefields far harsher than any American street patrolled by prejudice. But can a single act shake an entire system? And what happens tomorrow when the person in handcuffs might be you? What do you think gave Danica the true strength to stand firm under the weight of judgmental eyes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If Danica's journey moved you, like, share, and subscribe so that the voice of justice never gets drowned out by silence.